I'm going to be roasting coffee today with the Nucleus LINK Coffee Roaster. This is the third video in my profile series where we're learning about the coffee roasting profile, what it is, what influences the profile, how to put one together, and now today experience how changing the profile is going to influence the cup. In my last video, I roasted the Honduran coffee. I used the Kaleido M2 for that. Absolutely delicious coffee. Really been enjoying that for the last couple of weeks. Before I begin, I want to thank GH Grinding and Brewing Solutions for letting me borrow the Nucleus Link and sharing my experiences with you. I'll have a link in the description so you can learn more about the Link. They are the authorized distributors here in the United States, so check that out. There's some really good step-by-step videos on how to use this roaster, so I'm not going to take time to repeat all of that. I'll have links for those as well in the description, and you can check those out and see how to use this roaster step-by-step. So why am I using the Nucleus Link today for this video? Well, the Link is the easiest and best way for me to demonstrate how important development time and ending temperature are while we roast coffee. The Link can repeat the same profile over and over with a push of a button and do it flawlessly. This is a smart roaster. It uses proportional, integral, and derivative control, PID control. It's a smart system, and when used with a coffee roaster, it can compare measured value against a desired value and calculate the amount of correction needed to be applied. So basically, the coffee roaster will follow a profile and make any of the necessary changes to its controls to ensure it stays on that profile and makes the event times and temperatures. Using that feature, I can take the roast, modify the development percentage, and roast it again and again, and the roaster will follow the curve exactly with the same event times and temperatures. This is exactly what I want. And the only difference being the development times are going to be longer for the other roasts. All right, so in just a minute, we're going to go ahead and roast 3 coffees. You'll see them side by side with the same curve, same first crack time, but with 3 different development times and ending temperatures, and we're going to see if we can taste the difference. Before I do that, I want to thank you for being here and let you know about some free resources that I'm sharing at my Buy Me a Coffee Extras page with several hundred downloads already. Of course, there is the coffee roasting profile worksheet that you've been seeing here in this series. That's available for free. I also have some artisan profiles that I have available for free as well, so be sure to check that link out in the description below in this video. Okay, so let's get this roaster set up. But first, before we do that, we need to find out what profile the Link thinks that I should use for this coffee. This step is unique to the Link, and it's a huge selling point for this roaster. So let's open the Nucleus Link app on a smartphone and choose the profile selector. We'll be doing a new sample roast entry. In my demonstration, we'll be using the filter profiles, but the Link can craft the profile based on the other brewing methods, which are cupping, omni, of course filter, which we're using, and espresso. Next, we need to answer a few questions, and then we can set up the roaster and get our beans ready. The Link comes with a density measuring tube. There are 2 versions of this tube. So I have version number 2. Measuring the Honduran coffee using their method gives me a number, a weight basically, and it's 68.7 grams. There's a specific way to measure this, and you can see how that is done in the links that I shared in the description. Next is the process. This is a washed coffee, and the roaster is a 110 volt roaster. The varietal is Pacamera. After completing the page, we're presented with a profile number of 204.5. Let's talk about this for a second, because this number is going to help us understand the importance of all of the questions that we were just asked, the information that we just filled out. And it's going to give us an idea of how this profile is built. 204.5 represents the estimated first crack temperature. Wow, how does the app know that? Well, I'm going to share that interesting story once we get going here in the roast. By the way, the development percentage that you see here on the screen is a range, and it's a suggestion for you to start. You can change this based on your own personal preferences. Sam Cora, the developer of the Link Roaster and all of his 300 profiles that come with the Link, recommends 10 to 12% for this high-density washed Pacamarin coffee using the filter brew method. So these recommendations are specific. The profiles are designed for sample roasting, and if you are about to buy hundreds or thousands of pounds or kilos of coffee, green coffee, and you want to be sure that this is the right bean for your purchase, then the lower development range, this development percentage range of 10 to 12%, is going to help you taste all the nuances of the coffee. If you want to balance the cup or go darker, then you've got a couple of options with the Link. You can simply increase the development percentage, like we're doing here in this example today, or you can create your own custom profile with the Link. Okay, so let's measure and put 100 grams of coffee into the roaster. Load the profile from the Link Studio software on your PC or Mac. Mine's a Mac, and we're going to load that into the Nucleus LINK Roaster. They synchronize through a cable. You can also do this directly on the LINK Roaster without the Studio software if you want. Then we're going to set the development percentage and then begin the roast. The Link machine displays the time, temperature, target first crack temperature, and the development percentage. The Studio will display a lot more information than that, including the live graph with just tons of information. Here is the software running right now. So now we just sit and watch. And this is a huge selling point for some people who want to roast coffee and they don't have a lot of knowledge. They don't want to be a human PID controller. They just want to roast the coffee and they want the roaster to do it for them. So some things to notice as the Link does this job. Notice how the profile looks to be kind of a mess in the first minute or so of the roast. This is totally normal. The roaster is making a lot of adjustments so that it can direct itself towards the background profile that appears here on the screen. Here's the bean temperature line. Then there is the rate of rise. Also notice the power in kilowatts shown here on the graph. There's some other settings that can appear like kilowatts and the fan speed, but we're not displaying them here right now. Okay, so the roaster is on track and it's following the bean curve. This, by the way, this may be the first time you've seen the Link, and it may look kind of familiar. The Link is the cousin to the Cafe Logic Nano 7 roaster. They share the same chassis and major components, but the software and the profiles are where things are different. The Link is designed to be a sample roaster first, out in the field, at the farm, or in the lab. It can even be used for brewing competitions. As a matter of fact, Sam Cora did that with brewing competitions. And it was born out of that passion that he had in cooperation with Cafe Logic and their team to enhance the software, and Sam has developed hundreds of profiles that are used in this Link. If you're in the market for a home roaster that has a small footprint, can be used with little knowledge of coffee roasting, and produce consistent results, then the Link should be on your radar. For those that want to learn more about profile roasting or use the Link as a sample roaster, the Link is a great option. If you own a roastery and you sample greens before purchasing hundreds or thousands of kilos or pounds of coffee, then the Link is the roaster that you should have. It could save you from purchasing the wrong coffee. And lastly, the Link and the Cafe Logic Nano 7, they are different. They use different approaches to decide how to roast the coffee, so be sure to do your research before you buy either of these roasters so you can decide which one is best for you. As I mentioned a minute ago, these profiles are all created by Sam Cora, And I listened to a really interesting interview with Sam on Ingo's Roast Rebels YouTube channel. You should check that video out, it's excellent. Sam was chasing the dragon, so to speak, trying to find consistent data points which influence a coffee's optimal roasting profile. This is really important. He started to see a pattern and he asked himself, what data about the specific green coffee could help determine a specific first crack time and a development time which would consistently give a true expression of the potential that that coffee has to offer. He determined that there were 4 data points that started to correlate. First was volume by weight, density, and then the process of the coffee. The third was varietal, and the fourth was the humidity of the coffee. So Sam created an algorithm in a spreadsheet, and he experimented with thousands of roasts using different kinds of coffee. There were 2 different dominant data points that accomplished this, and they are density and coffee process. Humidity isn't currently being used because it's kind of expensive, and Sam wanted this roaster to be accessible. Variety isn't being used, even though it's on the questions that we filled out on that form. He's using that data, and it'll eventually be available in his calculation. Also, Sam quickly learned that voltage impacted his algorithm. Apparently, voltage is a factor that influences the roaster's performance, and that's why I had to tell the app why my voltage was 110. All of these data points were used to give a prediction of temperature that the coffee would hit first crack, and also what the optimal development would be for that coffee. So in our case, density and process lead us to 204.5 for our first crack temperature and a time of about 7 minutes plus or minus 15 seconds. This profile is designed to give the user a best starting point, kind of our first reference that's going to give a fair expression of the organic compound of that coffee, basically what that coffee has to offer. All right, so notice how the machine is changing its power settings here on the graph. It's doing that to help keep itself on track and on the profile. So we're approaching first crack now, and the profile says that it'll happen at 204.5. I can either mark first crack myself, or I can allow the machine to just follow the profile. And for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and let the link do this for us. By the way, I meant to show you the probe for this roaster. This is an exposed wire probe, which will give very fast and accurate readings for the Link Coffee Roaster. Also, notice how it is, it's on top of the bean mass. All right, so here we go. First crack has just begun, and we are within a few seconds of the predicted temperature. Now the link is simply ensuring that there is a 10% development time for the first roast, 12.5% for the second roast, and 15% for the third roast. All right, there we have it. Development lasted about 40 seconds for the first roast with an ending temperature of 209.9. Now the second roast is finishing 12 seconds later at 7:53 with an ending temperature of 212.1. And then the third roast is ending now at 8:09 with an ending temperature of 214.3. As soon as this roast ends, it goes into the cooling mode really quick. You can see that happening here on the graph. We're not going to sit here for 3 minutes during the cool down period, but that's what happens with each of these roasts. They went through that period. All right, the coffee has had a chance to rest now for 4 days, and I have tried this coffee 2 times now. I've drank these roasts. I've sipped the coffee for each of these roasts to discern the differences between the 10% development, the 12.5% development, and the 15.7% development coffee. And there are differences. There's subtle differences when you go from one coffee to the next. But when you go from the lightest to the darkest, we're looking at a time difference of 26 seconds longer in development between the 10% and the 15.7%. 26 seconds is quite a while in development, and that's going to make a difference in the cup. That's going to affect how the coffee tastes. Also, we see that the temperature difference is goes from 209.6 degrees to 214.8 degrees. That's like a 6-degree difference, and that is enough to taste. Ultimately, the moisture loss is going to be very telling, and we start out with a 12% moisture loss with the first roast, which was the 10% development roast. And then when we go to the 12.5% development, it is a 12.5% moisture loss. Not much of a difference. But then when we get to the 15.7% development roast, we have a 13.5% moisture loss. I was listening to Rob Host talk about development time, ending temperatures, and moisture loss, and just overall roasting consistencies going from batch to batch. And he said that when he roasts coffee, if his coffee's moisture loss is more than 0.5% different, then he considers those to be different coffees. He would not put those two coffees in and mix them and sell them off as the same coffee. He considers them to be a different coffee, a different roast, so a different profile. Let's look at the color. Color is king. When we go through and look at these, you're going to see that there is a difference, although it is subtle. You can see some variation with the lighter roast, but the darker we get, the less variation it is, and the color tone is a little darker. Here they are side by side, and you'll see, even though, this is a really up-close photo, you're going to see some light beans and some dark beans on the left. That's the 10%. And you'll see quite a bit of variation, but when you start to look at the middle, that's the 12.5% development, we see that the variation, the color variation, is a little more consistent. And then on the third right panel there, that's the 15.7%, we see more consistency, and the overall tone is just a little darker. It's very subtle. We're not talking about a light roast, a medium roast, and a dark roast. We're in this medium range, and we're on the light side of medium, and we're on the darker side, but not real dark, side of medium. And why am I doing this? Why didn't I do a light, medium, and dark? I wanted to point out how subtle differences in our ending temperature and our development time can influence our cup. So it's obvious that a light roast is going to taste different than a dark roast, and you can clearly see the differences. But even these subtle differences, they affect what we taste. And so let's talk about that. I've tried these coffees twice now already, and there are subtle differences. The 10% development roast was similar to the M2 that I roasted last week, or in my last video, but it was a little less sweet. There wasn't as sweet. There was a little bit of a caramely note in there, but it was not like, I wouldn't call it a real sweet cup. There was some chocolate, but it was like a real light chocolate, kind of a milk chocolatey. There was a little bit of an acidity note that was kind of a raspberry lime note that was in there, but it wasn't real intense at all. It was kind of subtle. Then we go to this 12.5% development roast, and this was really interesting because this tasted very much like the Kaleido M2 roast I did in my previous video. Very similar. There was a little bit of a floral note in the aroma, which, by the way, the first 10% development didn't have. I was kind of surprised about that. The sweetness was there. There was a little bit of a caramel sweetness in there, more than that the lighter cup. And there was definitely a clear chocolate, but it wasn't like a baker's chocolate. It was just a really nice chocolatey note that just kind of laid there on the tongue. And the raspberry lime popped. It was there. It was really a highlight, and it made the coffee really interesting. I really enjoyed it. But then when we got to the darker of the three, the 13.5% moisture loss, the 15.7% development time, this coffee did not have the sweetness that the middle roast had. It did not have the floral aroma. It had a little bit of a spicy aroma. There was a little bit of a kind of a vanilla in there in the aroma, but it had kind of a spice note in it. And then when I tasted it, I got a little bit of an acidic note, kind of like a lemon acidity. as well as a really dark cocoa, like a 90% cocoa. It was good, but it was definitely not the same cup. It was a darker taste, a darker overall experience, but it wasn't like a dark roast coffee where you're tasting roastiness and ash. This was just starting to head into where you might be able to start tasting some roastiness, but we're just talking, very subtle differences in the way these coffees taste. So I think that the point in all of this was that subtle differences will make a difference in the cup, and it's important for us to control our ending temperature and our development time when we're roasting coffee. How do we do that? Well, I highlighted that and I focused on that in my previous video. You should check that out, where I'm roasting on the Kaleido M2. And what I did was I made sure that as I entered first crack, I was at a rate where I had enough momentum to move me through first crack without hard explosive cracks and a high rate of rise. That gave me a chance to let the coffee be in development for a while, but yet having subtle or low temperature increases from the beginning of development till the end of development. So I did not end up with a dark cup. I ended up dropping with a nice development, and it was a delicious coffee. I really enjoyed it, and I would say that this middle roast was very similar to that. Oh, by the way, that darker roast coffee did have a bigger body. It was kind of a silky kind of a body, and it was an enjoyable cup. It really was. I would not discount any of these roasts as being a bad roast. The Link did a great job. It stayed on track. If you look at that profile, I mean, they're laying right on top of each other, and so I think the Link is a really cool roaster. Great experience with the Link. And so what do we do next? What are we going to have happen next? Well, I think I would like to try to talk about this middle phase and what happens when we make changes to the middle phase. How does that affect the cup? So hopefully in our next video, we'll be able to address that as well. For those of you who aren't familiar with the 3 phases of coffee roasting, I've got a video on that you can check out here in my Essentials playlist. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you have a great week roasting, and I'll see you next time. Take care.